goodness, known by many names, heard in many voices. We invoke your presence with us this day as we honor His Excellency Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister of Dominica. Continue to bless Prime Minister Skerrit and the brave people of Dominica. Draw close to them as they struggle to recover from the devastation of Hurricane Maria of last year. We remember those who died in that awful natural disaster. We are minded of our human frailty and our vulnerability to the powers of nature that exceed our greatest fears. And compassion, we pray, Amen.
And now I ask President Ken Gormley to make his remarks and confer the honorary degree on Prime Minister Skerrit.
Thank you, Gerald. Welcome everyone to this special gathering. On behalf of the entire Duquesne University community, I extend warm greetings to His Excellency Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica, and to his wife, Melissa Skerrit, who's here today. Could you please stand and be recognized? The First Lady here. We're also honored to have with us from Dominica the Honorable Joseph Isaac, Minister of the Environment, Climate Resilience, Disaster Management, and Urban Renewal. Could you please stand? His Excellency Ambassador Steve Farrell, Cabinet Secretary. Could you please stand, Secretary? The Honorable Barbara Daly, Consul General and Deputy Permanent Representative from the New York Mission. Welcome. And we have some other members of the delegation from Dominica here with us today. Could you please stand so we can welcome you? Thank you very much. So His Excellency Roosevelt Skerrit is serving his 4th consecutive term as Prime Minister of his native country. In 2004, when he was first elected, he was the world's youngest head of government at age 31. He's a political leader of the Dominica Labor Party and has been a member of Parliament for the Villa Caz constituency since 2000. He previously served as chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and chairman of the Caribbean Community. Prime Minister Skerrit comes to us from the front lines of the war on climate change. As you may know, Dominica is a small Caribbean island in the Lesser Antilles, often referred to as the nature island of the Caribbean. Development is encouraged, but with utmost sensitivity to native flora and fauna. Some of the most beautiful rainforests in the Caribbean exist in Dominica, and as the Prime Minister and I were talking about, some of the best snorkeling, so I'm looking forward to coming down one day. But today, as Father Bill mentioned, the nation is suffering. It's been ravaged for the past several years by back-to-back hurricanes. Most recently in September of 2017, it was hit very hard by Hurricane Maria, a deadly Category 5 storm that inflicted $1.3 billion in damage, destroying or severely damaging almost half of the island's buildings, along with much of its power and telecommunications infrastructure. As Prime Minister Skerrit will tell you, climate change means that most likely there will be more storms for Dominica and elsewhere on the planet, stronger storms than ever before. We've witnessed devastation from these historic catastrophic storms here in the United States too, most recently just on the Atlantic coast and in the panhandle of Florida. Replace bananas with hurricane-resistant crops, and even relocate towns from earlier times. The list goes on. The Prime Minister has implored all nations who contribute the most to climate change, and the U.S. is asked ourselves during that conference, what kind of a world do we want to leave for those who come after us? We feel very strongly that it's our responsibility to act, especially within the context of higher education, as we set a course for the next generation of leaders who will guide the future of this planet where we make our common home. So, Prime Minister, thank you so much for your commitment to sustaining God's creation. We're thrilled and we're honored to have you here with us today to deliver the Integrity of Creation Leadership Address. But first, it is my privilege to confer upon you an honorary doctorate from the Duquesne University of the Holy Spirit, celebrating this year its 140th year as a premier higher education institution in recognition of your many accomplishments. So if you could please come forward. Your Excellency, Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister of Dominica, as President of Duquesne University of the Holy Spirit, and by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Board of Directors of Duquesne University and by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I hereby confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges thereunto attached, and cause you to be invested with this hood appropriate to that degree. Congratulations. And he gets this diploma, and he didn't even have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this one. So congratulations.
Roof on 7 days church, go in. My neighbor roof, gone. Boy, watch that. Oh, you don't see what we see. It's rough in Dominica, boss.
On the morning of September 19th, 2017, Dominica faced the harsh realities of climate change. The once green and flamboyant nation was transformed into a landfill for the catastrophe that was Hurricane Maria. More than $500 million in infrastructural damages, buildings and businesses destroyed, roofless homes, broken communities and people, roads, bridges, lush vegetation, all washed away and blown away.
I am 60 years old. First time I have ever witnessed that kind of thing.
Need a lot of tarpaulins and supplies.
We dug graves today in Dominica. Our homes are flattened. Our buildings roofless. Our water pipes smashed and road infrastructure destroyed. Our hospital is without power and schools have disappeared beneath the rubble. Our crops are uprooted. Where there was green, there is now only dust and dirt. The desolation is beyond imagination. Mr. President, fellow leaders, the stars have fallen. Eden is broken.
Despite the broken homes, minds, and hearts, Dominica announced its goals to become the first climate-resilient country in the world, led by the Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit. Through efforts of the Dominican people, the government, and regional and international friends, to date, water and sewerage services have been restored to 98% of the country. The electricity company reports that 97% of its pre-Maria customers have been reconnected. Communications have been restored by both Digicel and Flow, including radio services. Several rivers in Dominica have been dredged and have proven to withstand increased water flow from heavy rainfall. All primary and secondary roads have been made accessible, some rehabilitated. Work continues on the repairs and construction of permanent bridge structures and Bailey bridges. Over $55 million have been invested by government in the housing sector, and millions more by development partners and friendly governments. A revised physical planning building code was published. The tourism industry is growing, with continued works on new hotel developments with new fashions in that sector. Government has directly injected over $3 million in the business sector, and the sector has returned to a state of buoyancy. All students are back in the classroom. Over $86 million injected into the recovery of the education sector. The agriculture sector is blooming with a direct investment of $18 million from the World Bank, distribution of tissue culture, resilient plantlets, and other agricultural inputs and local hucksters. After a successful return of Dominica's Carnival in February 2018, the country plans to host its independence celebration with the headlining World Creole Music Festival in October 2018. The government and people of Dominica
Thank you very much. Let me say good morning to all of you. And I want in a special way to recognize the president of Duquesne University of the Holy Spirit, Professor Ken Gormley, Dr. Gerald Badu, Francis Philbin Endowed Director of the Center for African Studies, Reverend Fathers of the Congregation of the Holy Spirit, my friend and colleague, Honorable Joseph Isaac, Minister in the Government of Dominica, my dear wife, Melissa, who is here with me today, Ambassador Steve Farrell, Secretary to the Cabinet of Dominica, Honorable Barbara Daly, Consul General of Dominica in New York, administrators and members of the Integrity of Creation Committee, Mrs. Missy Henderson, Director of Public Affairs in the Office of the Prime Minister of Dominica, distinguished faculty, students, and guests of the university, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends all. It is my great pleasure and honor to be associated with this institution, not only as a devout Catholic, but also to be considered worthy to become an alumnus of this illustrious Duquesne University, which incidentally is the only Spiritan institution of higher education in Pennsylvania that has received the Environmental Protection Agency's EPA's Energy Star Combined Heat and Power Award for its natural gas turbine located on campus. Duquesne University has steadfastly shown its commitment to protecting our fragile environment with its continued support of environmentally friendly initiatives, such as its innovative ice cooling systems, which cools buildings and reduces peak energy demand, to identify but two of its many initiatives at protecting the ozone and reducing greenhouse effect. It pleases me that in recognizing this, the university is also giving high regard to environmental conservation through Duquesne's Center for Environmental Research Education, which offers undergraduate and graduate degrees in environmental science and management, along with the specialized MBA with a focus on sustainability. The biodiversity of our environment is our duty responsibility. It has provided our sustenance through the centuries and must therefore be preserved and maintained, not only for our posterity, but for that of future generations. And therefore, on this occasion, I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you at Duquesne University for doing your part to ensure that humanity has a fighting chance of survival. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I speak to you today not as a harbinger of bad news or a cynic, but as someone who has experienced firsthand the devastatingly cruel and merciless effects of climate change and global warming. More and more, experts are warning of the danger of losing our planet as weather patterns change and shift. For those who may view my island home, the Commonwealth of Dominica, as located in a region thousands of miles away, and therefore somewhat removed, I invite you to join me in recounting, here in the United States of America, the wrath of Category 4 Hurricane Harvey as it ravaged Texas in August of 2017. Leaving in its path 106 confirmed deaths and damage estimated at US $125 billion. This placed it among the costliest natural disasters ever in the United States, comparable to Hurricane Katrina of 2005. Just last week, Hurricane Michael, another Category 4 hurricane, devastated beyond recognition areas of Florida and an already fragile coast of the Carolinas, with the death toll as of Saturday from the monstrous storm having risen to 18, according to Reuters and the New York Times. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it has therefore become painfully obvious that such disasters are no longer relegated to the islands of the Caribbean or Pacific region, and that we are all susceptible to the intensity of these calamitous occurrences, whether they be in the form of wind and rain, or earthquakes and other formerly natural phenomena. When Category 5 Hurricane Maria made landfall in Dominica on September 17, 2018, it felt like all the demons from all over the world had gathered up and flung at us at 175 miles per hour. Maria followed closely on the heels of Irma, one of the biggest hurricanes to make landfall on record in the Caribbean. In the space of just 2 weeks, 2 Category 5 hurricanes, a more than once in a 1,000 years event, shook the world into confronting our planet's changing climate like no disaster had done before. For many years, those of us warning about floods and droughts, of rising sea levels and submerging countries, felt like we were shouting alone in the dark. After Maria and Irma, climate change was thrust out of the shadows into the light, away from theoretical construct into lived reality, pulled from distant future straight into the present. We must not let this moment slip away. We must not let those memories slip into the night. Leading scientific experts explain that the scale of this disaster was a direct result of the warming of the Atlantic Ocean. Hurricanes and tropical storms pick up more water than before as they cross the Atlantic, which, in turn, they drop with devastating consequences when they make landfall. Dominica has witnessed a dramatic escalation of storm damage in recent years. The recently released report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, recorded that, and I quote, climate-related risks to health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security, and economic growth are expected to increase with global warming, and that any such increase is projected to affect human health with primarily negative consequences, end of quote. A few days after Maria struck, the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica declared its intention to be the first climate-resilient nation in the world. Some observers may say that we have overreached ourselves, that Dominica's intention to be the world's first climate-resilient nation is overly ambitious. We beg to differ. We believe, my dear brothers and sisters, that there are no alternatives. Dominica's vision is an integrated set of specific, practical, time-bound targets that we believe are achievable with resources that have been committed. As explained in the IPCC report, climate change impact and responses are closely linked to sustainable development, which balances social well-being, economic prosperity, and environmental protection. That principle was adopted in 2015 by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, to, and I quote, provide an established framework for assessing the links between global warming and development goals that include poverty eradication, reducing inequalities, and climate action, end of quote. Dominica is a natural candidate to demonstrate that a new, more sustainable development trajectory can be achieved. We are small enough that climate resiliency is within our reach in a relatively short period of time. Larger countries would find this much harder to achieve. Yet, Dominica is also a sovereign, democratic nation with all the complications, advantages, and challenges that brings. Rearranging entire systems of education and health to support resiliency is complex. Reorganizing systems of ports, bridges, and roads is expensive. Resetting the relationship between private and public sectors has wider implications. Employing the rule of law and maintaining social order must be carefully done. Transforming decades-old ways of doing things by consensus through complex coordination with transparency and sensitivity to all stakeholders is not easy. But we cannot evacuate everyone and abandon ship in the event of the next catastrophe. So resilient, my dear brothers and sisters, we must become. We believe that building a resilient nation is about more than just strengthening systems and climate-proofing public infrastructure. It will call for us to adopt a particular moral character. A resilient nation embraces full respect for the needs of all its citizens and communities, economic, social, political, and spiritual. Our challenge, therefore, is not simply one of physical renewal, but of social regeneration. We're reminded by the IPCC report that international cooperation is a critical enabler for developing countries and vulnerable regions to strengthen their action for the implementation of climate responses, including through enhancing access to finance and technology and enhancing domestic capacities to take into account national and local circumstances and needs. Hence, it continued, adaptation and mitigation options to global warming, implemented in a participatory and integrated manner, can enable rapid, systemic transitions in urban and rural areas, and that these are most effective when aligned with economic and sustainable development, and when local and regional governments and decision makers are supported. In this regard, the international community has been inspired by Dominica's goal and the conviction of its leadership. It has so far been supportive of our efforts to deliver on this vision and the example that Dominica can potentially set for the rest of the world. We believe that what has so far been pledged, if those pledges are honored within the timeframe set, in combination with our own limited national resources, it is possible for Dominica to be meaningfully climate resilient in 5 years. Today, I submit to you that it is only with this type of global cooperation and perspective that we as a world and humanity as a whole will tackle climate change efficiently and effectively. In this regard, there is no time to wait. We are committed to follow our well-thought-out plan, which will soon be ratified by the government. To be clear, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, striving for a climate-resilient nation is an overarching approach to national development, which makes society and the economy sustainable, protects our natural and built environments, and generates inclusive growth that, as far as it is humanly possible to ensure, is not altered, reversed, or undone by climate change. We recognize that the loss and damage as a percentage of GDP from extreme climate events are correlated with levels of economic development and equality. We witnessed this correlation in the Caribbean. Through the markedly different effects the same climatic events had on neighboring countries with different levels of development. Cayman Islands versus Grenada following Hurricane Ivan in 2004, or Puerto Rico versus Florida following the 2017 hurricane season. A blueprint for achieving climate resilience cannot be independent of a plan for long-term socio-economic development. Our plan is based on our lived experience. We reviewed each of Dominica's actions in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. In developing this plan, we posed the question, what would Dominica have had to have in place before a climate disaster to ensure that they would not have to repeat that action next time around? We recognize that there is a danger in fighting the last fire. The next climate-related disaster may be different. Consequently, the result of this exercise was to identify the broad characteristics of a disaster-resilient nation with the practical objectives that would allow those characteristics to be achieved within 5 years and within a budget. The first objective of resilience is that citizens must have early resumption of essential services, such as electricity, water, telecommunications, health, security, access to food, and payments. Undergrounding utility lines in built-up areas is one example of what can be done to help achieve this goal. Those who cannot be reconnected quickly will be encouraged and helped to live at a higher level of self-sufficiency. The second objective is that during a climate disaster, all citizens must have safer shelter. And in the aftermath of the disaster, all citizens must have access to essential supplies of food, water, energy, and medicines for the length of time it would take before ready supplies are available once more. More public shelters, better built private homes, public and private food and medicine stores, and backup energy will contribute to achieving this objective. No one can be left behind, and no one should be left behind. Every human being matters and is deserving of dignity and an acceptable form of shelter. The third objective is that the flow of national income does not hit a sudden stop after a natural disaster. One example of this is our ongoing efforts in geothermal development that allows for exporting geothermally generated electricity undersea to Guadeloupe and Martinique with a hurricane clause that pays out a higher income when a natural disaster has hit Dominica, is one example of how we might begin to achieve this objective. Others include the greater export of individual professional services down a resilient high-speed internet connection and more resilient agriculture and tourism. These three objectives of our plan will be able to function independently of each other, but will also draw strength from each other. Our approach is to inculcate resilience at the household, community, spiritual, and national levels. There is a need for overarching frameworks for the role of the law in climate resiliency, the roles of institutions, the roles of national disaster protocols, the relationship between public and private sectors, before, during, and after a disaster, and the importance of national conversations, engagement, and consultation. We believe that when the final reckoning comes, the master counter will look past our mask and add up what we did, not what we said. What efforts we made to bring sanctuary to our neighbor, and what efforts we have all made to end climate change globally. I reiterate today that climate change is no longer an abstract euphemism, pertaining only to small islands in the Caribbean or Pacific regions. Events of this past 36 months have brought this home forcibly to us all. Every single one of us has a stake and must therefore raise a voice in the promotion of the concept of reducing exposure to such. I ask this morning that you too clear your throats and let your voices be heard on climate change. We call on you to join us in this journey to build a climate resilient future. Let us march towards the sunlit uplands together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. Again, I am humbled by your inviting me here today, Mr. President. I invoke God's continued blessings on this institution and all associated with its wonderful work here in Pennsylvania and the world over. You have done a remarkable job at helping to make Mother Earth a better place for all mankind. May God bless this great country, the United States of America. May God bless your university. May God bless my country, Dominica, and its citizens. I thank you very much.
The Prime Minister has agreed to take some questions for the next 15 minutes. If you'd like, please use the microphone in the middle. And if there's more than one of you, you just line up and ask your question. So you have a few minutes to ask any questions regarding what he spoke about or anything related to the topic.
I believe thank you very much for your question. I believe there is that consciousness, because what we have seen over the years is not only the big storms coming, and more ferociously, is a change in the ordinary weather pattern in our country, in our region. We normally have what is called a rainy season. And many years during that rainy season, we see droughts in our region. So that has also impacted on agriculture, the type of crops we grow, when do we grow them, and the level of productivity or production or yields from those crops. So yes, I can say to you that it is not about these big storms. What these big storms have done is that it has jolted the consciousness of all of us, but that we are aware and conscious of the fact that there are many issues affected by the climate change. Our water systems, our health is associated with climate change and some new diseases that are cropping up. You see more impacts on agriculture with regards to diseases in our crops. So it is not only these big storms, but the number of changes that are taking place and have been taking place over the years. And this is what we've been saying to the international community, that the issue of climate change cannot be an ideological debate. It is a matter that we all need to work together to address it. We may all have different perspectives, but we must not lose sight that climate change is impacting the very way of life of every one of us in this world, irrespective of the country you're in. And so yes, a simple answer to your question is yes, there's a greater consciousness on the part of our citizenry that climate change is affecting our way of life. And if we do not do something about it, now we will see countries disappearing, submerging. And the unfortunate thing for many of us in the islands, for all of us in the islands, we have nowhere to run to. You know, one young boy said to me once, you know, can we not move the Caribbean to somewhere else? You know, and I took the opportunity to explain to him, wherever you take the Caribbean, we will also suffer the same consequences because the whole world is impacted by climate change.
Barbados and learned of the work being done by the new prime minister there in Barbados to deal with climate change as well, and began to find out more about what CARICOM is doing. Do you find that the deployment of renewable energy is becoming a larger conversation throughout the Caribbean as a way and a means to deploy alternative energy and get rid of our fossil fuel-based dependency as also a way to deal with climate change?
Certainly. In the case of Dominica, we have developed a strategy, an energy strategy, that speaks to generating our energy 80%, a minimum of 80% of our energy from renewables. As a matter of fact, we've just signed on a loan agreement with the World Bank to construct a geothermal plant, first for domestic consumption and with the intention of exporting. So we have a mix of geothermal, hydro, and solar that will give us the 80% minimum of our energy supply. But that concept, that idea is well rooted in the whole of the CARICOM, the Caribbean community. And every country within CARICOM, if you look at our energy matrix over the years, you will see an increase in renewables playing a part. And private citizens also are even ahead of governments in that regard, because people are now themselves getting themselves off the grid and off the fossil fuel grid. So there is a greater consciousness. Obviously, the challenge for us in the Caribbean is one of access to financing. We have the ideas, we have the strategy, we have the plan, but we have a challenge of having access to ready financing to implement those projects. So if you were to give us some money tomorrow, I give you the assurance that the whole of the Caribbean would move mainly to renewable energy. The fact is we just do not have the resources, because as you know, the capital investment is very high, and therefore you need those funds to implement it. So yes, institutions like the World Bank have funds, but sometimes the challenge you have with such institutions is a protracted delay in the procurement process. It takes too long. It takes years sometimes. And that's a challenge which we have. So yes, I can say to you in a simple response that the Caribbean is more conscious of it. And incidentally, in Barbados, they were innovators with regards to solar water heaters. So really, it was really invented in Barbados and expanded through the Caribbean. So, and this has been going on for many decades now. So our practices have been to conserve, but the challenge which you have in being more efficient at it, being more successful at it, is a lack of financial resources, coupled with a limited capacity in terms of experts and the knowledge to oversee and to guide those processes. And I think you here at Duquesne University, you have done a fantastic job, and I'm here to learn from you, from this university. And I'm hoping in my talk today I can get to see firsthand what you've done in a remarkable way that I believe all of us can benefit from.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I was wondering if I could ask you a question that will take us a little bit outside the Caribbean in regard to climate change and banana blight. I know that your country, one of your largest agricultural exports is banana, and we're seeing the blight circling the world. What are you doing in the agricultural sector about banana blight, and how is this or is it linked to global climate change?
Whenever you have a storm like Hurricane Maria or Irma, you see a resultant effect of having a lot of diseases coming in, especially where agriculture is concerned, because the wind carries them sometimes from Africa, sometimes from because the hurricanes do come from the African coast. I see my brother is laughing himself. But so it takes it along with it, also from Latin America and so forth, and even from neighboring islands. So you have things like black sigatoka that's affecting the banana industry. What we have done is to work with our international partners to bring in more resistant banana plants. So we have more varieties of bananas that we hope can withstand and can be immune to the banana blight that is impacting us. But this banana blight has had a devastating effect on rural communities and certainly has caused in all our islands, which depend on bananas largely, to see an increase in poverty and unemployment. So our challenge is to look at different crops, look at more disease-resistant crops, more climate-resistant crops, and to seek to encourage farmers to move in the direction. Because the sheer cost of treating these diseases is beyond the reach of the farmers and beyond the reach of our treasuries. And therefore, we have to take a practical decision. Are we going to continue to invest in treating these diseases, or are we going to move into different crops, additional crops that can bring in even greater yields and more return on the investment for farmers? So that's, in terms of the resilience strategy and the plan where agriculture is concerned, these are the things that we're looking to do to ensure that we can survive going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, I've never said that phrase in my life. We are so honored by your presence. I wanted to ask you, is there a positive role for tourism in the Caribbean generally to help with the kind of resilience you're working on? Is there a way for people, rather than to add to the problem of global warming by flying there, is there a way that tourism generally could help the Caribbean in its attempt to become more resilient in the area of climate change? And thank you.
we are working with the tourism industry to get them, and I must say publicly that they have been very cooperative, to get them to move more in the conservation of the environment, pursue a more renewable energy path, reduce on the amount of water that we use at the hotels, for example, reduce on the use of air conditioning units and that are dependent on fossil fuel, for example. And broadly speaking, one of the things that we're looking at, and of course when you come on holidays in Dominica, which I'm sure you will, you'll have the opportunity, for example, to plant a tree. So we are harnessing, we're propagating thousands and thousands of trees, plants, that we will encourage every visitor to our island to plant one. And we will be able, you'll be able to stay at your homes and your cell phones and so forth and monitor the growth of that plant. And we expect you to come in twice every year to visit and to be part of the Dominican experience. So we're looking to say, how can we use our environmentally conscious visitors to help us build back ecosystems, to build back habitats for our various species, and to be part of a wonderful experience of the reforestation of our forests that have been decimated by the hurricane. So, broadly speaking, tourism is going to have a very critical role because they're the major consumers of Mother Earth. And sometimes they can be the major contributors to the degradation of the environment. But there are smart, climate-friendly ways we can go about promoting tourism. And this is why, in Dominica's case, we've always promoted ecotourism, tourism that is centered around the protection, the preservation, and the conservation of the environment, and to ensure that hotel plans and the services fit into that very important ideal that we have set for ourselves. So this is why you hear we promote ecotourism, and we're called the Nature Isle of the Caribbean because we try to maintain a pristine environment. And just to give you a couple examples, my dear friend, more than 45% of our country is protected by law as natural reserves. We control by law fishing in the rivers and hunting of wildlife. We have marine reserves protected by law. And interestingly, to let them see the extent to which we are prepared to make our contribution to Mother Earth and its protection, one of the marine reserves is located in a fishing village. The residents there depend solely on fishing for their survival. And in all fairness to them, in Scottsdale and Soufriere, where this marine reserve is located, they have respected that. And they have withstood the temptation to fish in the marine reserve. And we use it for our snorkeling, our diving, so that our visitors and our residents can enjoy the snorkeling and what the Lord has given to us, the beauty of our oceans and our seascape. And of course, you may have heard, this government, my country, has taken a decision to ban the use of single-use plastic and styrofoam containers. And next year, we'll be making further announcements where we'll ban completely non-biodegradable items coming into our country, because these things affect the rivers and the beaches and our way of life in a dramatic way. So we are going to be very forceful with our position, because we believe the only way to survive for us in this world is, one, to protect and conserve and to preserve the environment, and also recognizing that the need for us to be more resilient in our preparations. Thank you. by the way, you don't only have to ask me questions. We would accept donations of minimum $1 million to Dominica, you know?
Prime Minister, thank you for this eye-opening conference and all the work you're doing. I would like to come back to the banana. Was in your country banana a monoculture, like? And did you ever consider, I think you began to speak about that, trying to find other culture and other plants, etc., more resisting? Did you consider to have the person who were the agricultures to work with permaculture, which produce 40 times more food for the people and take twice less water? Because usually when we speak about that, we always forget that since 2010, humanity has this fantastic tool, well, at least our humanity, which is permaculture. Thank you.
Your question is twofold. One, with diversification from bananas. Banana was a monocrop for many, many decades in Dominica. We exported to the United Kingdom in particular, based on our historical relationship with the British, and of course, our friends from Martinique and Guadeloupe would have exported to France. But since the 80s, we have developed a diversification program, not away from bananas, but to bring in additional crops. And we have encouraged farmers to diversify, because there's no way we could have survived, and the changing and the trade regime of the world proved that also. So we were not only encouraging ourselves to do it, but there was also an imposition on us by the new trading regimes, which removed our differential and special treatment by the Europeans in regards to our bananas and, of course, sugarcane from other countries. In our new strategy for agriculture, what we have recognized is that there are certain crops which survive the hurricane very well, especially root tubers. And therefore, we will be encouraging farmers to go more into root tubers, because they were able to survive the hurricane as compared to tree crops, bananas, and etc. And of course, in the new strategy for agriculture, and we have contracted a loan from the World Bank again to help finance the new strategy. We're looking at new methods that will require less land space, because you have an issue of agricultural lands competing with lands for communities, for homes, for building of homes, and also agriculture that would require less water. And so we are open to these methods and this technology, hydroponics and etc., utilizing more of our natural water from the rivers rather than treated water from the water company. That has also an impact with the chlorine content of it, and of course more resistant crops to various diseases that have cropped up in the region. So we are really focused in agriculture and ensuring that we adopt the practices that can see more production, more immunity to diseases, and crops that will require less of a capital expenditure and a greater return for the farmers and for the country. And of course, to one, have food security for our country, but secondly, as a foreign exchange earner for our country and our farmers. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking warmly the Prime Minister for his presentation. And now that he's an alum of Duquesne, we expect to see him every now and then. At this moment, he has a private engagement right after this, but I'm sure as he's walking out, if you really have something urgent to ask him to speak to him with, he can spare 5 minutes for that, okay? Thank you again.